But if someone is consuming, no errors were done at work, you just happen to test this individual, that's not enough reason based on the science of drug testing for this individual to lose their license. And if you have not been watching the news, the NFL and all these other places, they're getting rid of drug testing because they know it's ineffective. So for nurses, we know that this is so essential. One, we have a nursing shortage, and two, nurses need this medicine. We are saying to nurses that they are not human, because if every human deserves cannabis as medicine, if cannabis is medicine, everyone deserves the medicine. Doesn't matter what you do, right? So with that said, as part of our mission with CNOC is really making sure that we advocate for nurses, as patients, that we advocate for nurses to be at the table as well. So when we met the wonderful nurse Shonda, she really inspired us. And what inspired us about her story, even as difficult as it is the fact that Shonda is still in this space and that she took a hard turn, okay? Like I always tell people, sometimes you just jump off a cliff with no parachute and you just like, Jesus, help me. You know, somebody hold me and catch me. And I really feel like that's what cannabis nursing is. You jump off a cliff from your traditional career with no parachute and you just hope the universe is gonna catch you. And I just wanna say, before I bring Shonda up, that we are watching her float amongst the beautiful support of this community, and it is an honor to introduce you all to Nurse Shonda Broom. No problem.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shonda Broom, and I'm here from Louisiana, and I was a nurse that was actually disciplined due to cannabis. I had been a nurse for 12 years. 10 of those years, I actually owned a non-medical home care agency. And in 2016, I ended up closing unexpectedly, very abruptly. And that was like in July. And when I closed, I was depressed. I mean, I started my business early on in my nursing career. And 10 years of it, besides my business, I still did agency nursing, worked in different capacities as a nurse. So I was depressed. I couldn't find a job, and I know that sounds very crazy in this day and age, because nurses are needed everywhere, but I couldn't get a job. So that enhanced my depression. And so I smoked weed to help cope with depression. So I wasn't like a teenager, some people smoke for years, I'm a late bloomer, like they say. And so when I finally did get a job, I failed the pre-employment screening. So I wasn't actually on somebody's job. I had not been working for anybody for I think it was 5 months, and I failed my screening. So when I failed that screening, a month later, I did get another job, and I passed that drug test. And I was thinking everything was okay because I didn't hear anything. But it is to a company's discretion to report a nurse, and I did get reported. So they did investigate me. I did have to say what happened. I will say they don't care. I talked to an attorney, and she told me the same thing. She's like, I'm not gonna take your money because they're not gonna listen, regardless of what you tell us. And she was right, because I was honest about my situation. And you would think that being a nurse, there are nurses in the office, who makes these decisions. And the nurses in here, we know it's stressful being a nurse. Let's just be real. I think if anybody should be consuming it, should be us, number one on that list. But I mean, that wasn't the case. And so I had to choose between voluntarily surrendering and suspension. If I chose the suspension, I had to go to Narcotics Anonymous twice a week, an hour away from my house. I had to pay $4,000 to go to rehab. And I had to basically admit that cannabis was a drug, it was wrong, all this and that. And I was somebody who was using because it was helping me cope with depression. So I knew if I chose the suspension, that would mean they were right, I was wrong, and I believe I wasn't wrong. It took me a while. Look, I still kind of get when I tell the story.
It's okay, baby.
So it took me a while to get to this place to say this. I am accountable for my actions, meaning I know that I shouldn't have done it, but I can't apologize for my actions because I don't feel like I did something wrong in my eyes because it helped me. So when this happened, and I chose to voluntarily surrender, I went more on the path of being a holistic practitioner. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna walk away from nursing, I'm about to get into holistic wellness. We know holistic wellness is big. I'm about to do great, I'm just gonna get rich like that, and that wasn't the case, okay? You know, so I did that, and my thing is, I just wanna say this to y'all, y'all better not cry, but I say this all the time. If it wasn't for them, I would not be here. One of my things most when I was going through this was the shame, of course, but my shame was mostly of letting nurses of color know what happened to me. And that's because, you know, as nurses or just any type of black professional, we always taught that we gotta be 3 times as better to, you know, to prove we're just as good. And with nursing, I felt like if these nurses knew what I did, they would be so mad, like, why would you do that? You know how hard it is for us, like, why would you do that? And I lived with that shame for so long, and when I decided to get out of my own way, and I know we hear things like that, and I did not know what that means, but looking back, I know what it means now. I got out of my own way, and I accepted what happened to me, and I was like, okay, so I know I'm not the only nurse who thinks weed is okay. Let me try to find out, you know, where these other nurses are, if they even exist. And I ended up going to the mixer. I didn't have plans on going to the conference, but I went to the mixer because Ivy actually reached out to me. And when I went and I met them, and they were going around the room like we did earlier, and it's like, you know, tell your story or whatever. I got there late, saw I was the last person, and I'm like, everybody telling their story, and y'all like, I'm sweating. I'm like, oh my God, do I tell these people the truth? Do I just say, hey, I'm from Louisiana? And I was like back and forth. Because I always tell myself I would never talk openly about this because I was so embarrassed. So when it got to me, I was just like, you know, and I told my story. And when I told my story, they embraced me. And I don't want to get emotional because I'm not here to cry, but in that moment, I know that it wasn't in vain because the very people who I worried about accept me. So thank y'all.
We was not doing that. That was not on the agenda.
That was not part of it, y'all. Sorry. Nurses are emotional, by the way, so.
Oh.
It's raw and it's deep. And anybody that know me know. That's why I'm passionate about policy. Because what Shonda's going through is a result of policy failure.
Yes.
Her board of nursing that she pays, that governs her, they have failed to uptake the guidelines. Now, if this board, this NCSBN, if anybody knows about any board, this board has basically gave a recommendation. We have spoken several times with the actual lead investigator, Attorney Kathy Russell, about these guidelines. We've had her come to our organization, and she has told us that the guidelines were written because the board of nursing, they wanted guidelines. But pretty much what we have seen from state to state is that they have trashed the guidelines. They have not uptaken the guidelines. And so I'm just one of those people that believe in, I always tell them in the group that cannabis prohibition is a racist policy. And we have heard Wanda James, we've heard Dr. Knox this morning. All of these people talk about policy, and it's dark, it's heavy, we're crying because it's dark. It's heavy, but we have a place to where we can no longer say we don't want to deal with politics because it's ugly or because it's whatever it is, because we have a duty. You know what I'm saying? Sean, I tell her all the time, she's not the only one. And she hears from nurses. But it's not just about nurses, it's about any industry that you're in, it's bigger than that. And so that's one of the things that we fight for. So if one of the policies that's out, if you guys are not paying attention to that, is that the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. You know what I'm saying? And it called for, one of the things that nursing, not just nursing, but healthcare period is gonna be important in that proposed legislation, if that legislation goes through, which 2022 is looking like a year where something is gonna happen on the federal level, but don't hold your breath. But if it goes through, it calls for a shift of regulatory authority from the DEA to the Departments of Health and Human Services. So in your state, everybody has a Department of Health and Human Services that's heavily populated with nurses. And even though we're a strong, nurses are a strong profession, we protect our own, that doesn't mean that there are nurses there that are competent, that know these 6 essential principles. So we want to make sure that if and or when that policy goes through, that there are nurses that are working within those, in those state offices that understand that it's not going to stigmatize. That when they have something that come before them, they're going to know how to properly address it. So that's one of the things too that CNOC we're trying to build a force, a nationwide force. So no matter what state you in, you have somebody that work at your state department that understands and is compassionate about cannabis medicine. Whether you consume or you don't consume, that's not the point. You don't have to be a consumer to be an advocate. So that's just one of the big things. So we wanted you guys to hear from Shonda today. I'm toe up, so I can't even say nothing else today. I started off this morning with a headache, probably because I knew what was coming today. I guess it was a good headache, but anyway, I just been struggling today with a migraine headache. But I just wanted to finish with that, and I wanted to tell Shonda again, thank you for your voice. Because you may be healing people and you don't know it. You may not ever hear from somebody because they may not be at that point because you risk a lot. You give up a lot. And you may not know that, and I know you do hear from some people, but I just wanted to thank you for sharing your voice because you're helping. And unfortunately, your story is the story that we're going to use. We're going to turn lemons into lemonade and hopefully use your story to change the conversation.